Hello, I'm Noah Vortex, and this is going to be one of those vlogs where I just sort of freestyle a few ideas out, see what comes out of it. I've got no real set structure, but I do these like video diaries sometimes just to talk about a few things that might have been on my mind recently, and just see if anything interesting comes out of it. This channel is mostly, nowadays it's mostly me just vlogging the occasional art project I've been working on. A place to share my interest in philosophy and society, my reflections on politics and the world and everything else, as well as just a place where I post my video game clips in all honesty. So it's not really my main channel, but anyway, I thought something that's been very much on my mind recently, and to a greater or lesser degree has also been something I've been experiencing, is the phenomenon which is, I think, taken over a lot of contemporary culture, and in some respects is almost reaching a breaking point, and that is the experience of burnout from overwork, exhaustion, just feeling empty. You can tie it with depression in general, I think, as well, but also just a feeling of. Also, but I think in many respects with burnout it gets a bit deeper as well, because there can be a feeling that whatever you're investing your time into, whether it's to be earn money or just as a passion of yours, you reach a point where you adopt the attitude or perspective that it feels meaningless, or you start losing the meaning you may once have derived from it. Often this can be from work, but it could also be from, you just start losing interest also in hobbies that you used to have. In a general sense, you could say it is a form of depression, because that's exactly the same thing that clinical depression would do. It would sap all the joy that you may have once derived from otherwise pleasurable activities that used to give you a lot of pleasure and meaning in the past. They lose all that. Now, I think I've spoken a little bit in some other videos about this concept, but I think we are living in a dopamine saturated age where we're burnt out from being entertained, and we have grown up in a culture of such media saturation in all different forms that our brains have evolved or grown. The neurological connections have grown to just expect that all the time, right? And obviously we're in an age where that's probably going to accelerate and get even stranger with the development of Sora 2 now, and AI generated video, which is starting to become more realistic, harder to discern from obviously fake imagery. Now, most of it you can still tell somewhat, but again, this is an unprecedented development in technology to have a video generation via an LLM, advanced video diffusion, which is more or less indistinguishable from real life. Even though we're not quite there yet, we're pretty close now. It seems we're getting closer, and that trend doesn't show any real sign of slowing down. Now, obviously, I'm a millennial, so I'm an elder millennial, so I'm basically 40, so I've grown up in an age of media. Some of my earliest memories are even looking at television in some respects. Not my earliest ones. I mean, I remember trees and grass as well, and people, but I do remember one of my first memories of the television actually was going up really, really close to it with the static and then getting told to not do that because it's absolutely very unhealthy. But yeah, from what I remember, I just getting up to telly like this, very close to the static, and finding it kind of interesting enough as well, where when you actually see that cloudy static, you probably don't get it on modern televisions, but when you used to be able to see it, part of the frequencies represented in that TV static are echoes from the Big Bang as a whole. You can look into it; it's kind of interesting, but so that's sort of cool, to be fair. Like electromagnetic waves and stuff, or which are background radiation from the Big Bang. Kind of a cool thing. But yeah, It's hard to say exactly how things have changed for the newer generation because obviously, without actually doing studies, it's like anecdotal, I suppose. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that general literacy rates are dropping. Could that be an effect of increased attention, sort of dropping off so that students aren't having the ability to spend, a given amount of time just concentrating on a book, or possibly. I mean, they're still going to be consuming stories, obviously, and narratives, though. So, I mean, it's sort of an open question of, is this going to have to be a societal adaptation that we make, or, we'll just, because storytelling's always existed, like from the very first time that we rubbed some sticks together and made fire, and probably obviously prior to that when language evolved, right? And the medium's changed, so maybe you could say, for argument's sake, just to play devil's advocate, even though I love reading and books, you could, for argument's sake, say, well, what difference does it make if you listen to a story as an audio story or read it on a page? You're getting the same story, it's just in a different medium that your brain might be able to interpret, or might be more used to. But obviously, writing is a pretty fundamental skill for anybody, and reading, they're both dependent on each other. How do you learn how to write? By reading and understanding punctuation, grammar, spelling, vocabulary, etc., etc. So, obviously, they are key fundamental skills. In some respects as well, I even think, this might be my own bias shown, because I used to teach English, but I think English is even, or whatever language you're in, but language skills is even more important to learn, because it is the way that you orally communicate as well, right? So if you're less fluent in your language abilities, you're going to be less likely to have an influence on people, actually, less likely to be able to present in front of people, less likely to convince people of the strengths of your arguments, right? So a general fall in literacy is actually a profoundly it could have profound ramifications, actually. I would argue as well, and I can't prove this, but I think if you're less able to analyse and information or data that's presented to you, then you're less likely to be able to critically think about subjects, right, and form your own opinions based on comparing and contrasting bits of information, or even be able to come to those conclusions about whatever subject it might be. But again, debatable, because, or maybe the media just changes. But again, the thing with AI that's been kind of in a worrying development, actually, is the fact that it isn't really democratized in the true sense of the word. And I think libraries in general, or places which normally would have been the institutions that we trusted to hold knowledge, archive it, preserve it, for example, like a library system of some sort, of varying degrees of sizes in different institutions, seems to be getting chipped away at now. We are moving away from physical books. Now, I'm not a Luddite. Obviously, I worked as an e-learning developer, I worked as a web developer, a game developer, I can program in multiple languages. And I recognise the virtue of e-learning and LMS platforms and all that stuff. I mean, I've worked with a lot of them for a professional level. So they're worth having. But then, you should be combining that with physical-based resources too, like books. The thing is with books as well, and you could probably argue that there's been digitally scanned and archived for all this stuff, but you can't just start pulping them, because again, these are physical copies of important resources. It could be stories, it could be educational stuff, but I don't know. I don't think moving to a purely digital system of information management is a good idea, in all honesty. I think and again, if as AI is less democratized, the risk is that we'll start over relying on it for the reliant truth claims and everything else, or to look up information. A resource like Wikipedia, for example, was always brilliant, but it's also regulated and controlled by moderators of Wikipedia, so it's constantly being checked for accuracy all the time by I think it's hundreds of thousands of people, right, of actual human beings. Now, of course, the misinformation issues come in where you've got AIs hallucinating. But again, are they how can we, if it's not democratized open information that we can't check, how is there any way that we can check if narratives aren't being skewed in one direction? Obviously, if it's in private capital's hands, in this instance, like say of OpenAI, and there's no real checks and balances that are in place to be able to check the validity of that information, that is, I don't know how anyone can not understand that is a huge fundamental risk to the accuracy and the neutrality, if you will, of accessing information about a certain subject. And it's actually a huge risk to, just the validity to be able to, as a free thinker, go into a given subject and be able to form your conclusions based on the information that you're able to access, right? And I think there are plenty of people speaking up about this, but I think it might have profound effects on our culture. In many respects, I've got to say, I'm losing faith in our culture in general, and I don't just mean the UK. There's a lot of problems here, and there have been, and I think it's on the decline too, but worldwide actually. And in terms of just how, academic freedoms, the increasing censorship that's creeping in into lots of our institutions, none of that is good. Like censorship's a complicated thing, but in general, I'd say I'm against it. I don't think, again, like if you're thinking about artists as well and writers, a lot of the best books often deal with censorious topics that can be censored. Obviously that's something like 1984 was banned by the Soviet Union, for example, because it was literally a critique of that system. And it's a slippery slope to not, trumpet that old argument, but it basically is. Now, one of the only problems when you're defending being against censorship in general, though, is that it does mean that you have to defend a whole lot of material, I suppose, that you find personally just a bit terrible or cringy. But again, that's the price. I mean, for example, I don't know, someone wants to write loads of really poorly written hentai comics or something and distribute them online. Now, that isn't really my thing, but again, if someone wants to do that and adults want to access that information, why should I stop them? Why should any institution stop that from being distributed, right? That's a weird example, but again, in literature, though, the classic one that's always quite a difficult one to really pass is the Anarchist Cookbook, though, for example, which does literally include information on how to make bombs, make weapons, make that sort of thing, which is genuinely dangerous information in a lot of respects. And I suppose you could argue that though you couldn't prove an intent based on reading a book, obviously, maybe someone reads Mein Kampf, for example, but it's because they're researching on Hitler's ideas. It doesn't necessarily mean they believe him. I've got a copy of Quran in my bookcase that I got ages ago. I'm not a Muslim, same as the Bible. I'm not a Christian, but I have these books to hand if I ever need to study them or look into them. And to be honest, the only reason I picked up a copy of the Quran is Islam's fairly contested issue and argued a lot about in the public sphere, especially in the UK a lot more now, where there's just a rising Islamophobia, I suppose. But again, you need to actually look and to be honest, I'm not even particularly fond of Islam, as I'm not particularly fond of any religion, but again, I don't mind people practicing it as long as they don't step on any of my rights or anything else, in a secular sense. But also, I do think if you genuinely want to have a dialogue with people about religion, you need to understand the source material, You need to understand it to have a meaningful dialogue. There's no point, trying to argue something, because I think a lot of the thing also with say something like Islamophobia is just a lot of it's based on just stereotypes, really, to be honest, all of it more or less. The idea that jihad, for example, means one thing in Islamic culture, and in their understanding of but whereas it's quite complicated actually when you actually look into the theological understanding of it, for example. Same as with like in Christianity, like the Holy Spirit, or they are defined obviously, but then even if you look at different brands of Christianity, you've got Catholicism with the idea of original sin is a big idea in Catholicism now. It's not, and whilst there are versions of that idea in all the other religious sects, again, it's not necessarily key to the idea. And Catholics obviously have the idea of confessing your sins, which isn't such a big thing in other versions of Christianity. Anyway, it's been a bit of a ramble. Started off with burnout, didn't I? So I think at the minute, I think the struggle I have is something akin to an overthinking, over worrying struggle, one which I've encountered many times before. It's a kind of, I think as any thinker does, you struggle sometimes with feelings of nihilism and which at its worst is destructive, but at its best is actually a foundation to build from to try and figure out where next. Obviously, I've been teaching still. Got to be honest, I've been having some struggles with that. In terms of like feeling like I don't really fit into the institution, or just sometimes feeling like it's a thankless and just almost pointless task at times. But really, that's just more of a reflection of my current mood, I think, which tends to blacken everything because it's just the time of year, to be honest. So that will pass. And I think, something I've struggled with a lot anyway is just fitting into institutions, because I'm very much I try and maintain a very independent sense of self and my values and everything else, and a lot of the time it doesn't really work within a framework of an institution sometimes, depending on the institution, but it just having to act within certain rules and boundaries. Now, obviously, most of them exist for very common sense reasons, especially in educational institutions. Something I definitely do struggle with, though, is I think a lot of the time I'm actually really trying to embed the ideas of being a genuine critical thinker into the lessons, which mostly works, but then also want to embed in a certain morality of, you can explore a controversial idea, just make sure you can justify your angle on it, and that isn't a universally shared value, I don't think, which doesn't make any sense to me, because maybe I'm just too idealistic, but I actually want the students that I have to become, in a sense, like artists who can think about complex issues and do something interesting, even if it's not like perfect or whatever, but just get them used to like being able to analyze ideas and create some representation of them that's genuinely going to be thought-provoking. But that idealism, maybe it's just meeting cold, harsh reality, I suppose. Some of them have, to be fair, and I'm not going to go into detail. It's just life stuff, but I think maybe partially that is triggered off this feeling of what's even the point, sort of thing. But it will pass. It always does. It's just a crisis of confidence, I guess. Anyway, we'll leave this ramble here. I think that if you ever go for anything similar to this yourself, in terms of just feeling, it's temporary, basically. It's getting towards the end of the year. It's a rough time of year anyway. Just the nights are dead early. And you usually are working towards something, even if you lose sight of it yourself often. So it's not worth worrying too much about. I found that meditating recently has helped a bit, actually, just to clear my head. I think basically all it is essentially you just get backed up little thought loops, in a sense. And I find meditation definitely helps with clearing some of that out. Doing something like this as well, to be honest, where I'm just rambling, doing a sort of video diary is helpful too. Anyway, I'll leave it there.